Ryan Gosling arrives at the gates of his luxurious condominium at sunset, parking his vintage Chevrolet truck. Casually dressed in a simple flannel shirt and jeans, he is immediately stopped by the security guard, who doesn't recognize him and looks at him with suspicion. What the security guard did next left everyone stunned and led to an outcome no one could have imagined. But before we dive into the rest of this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because we've got another exciting one coming your way tomorrow. It was a crisp evening in Los Angeles. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, as if the city were bidding farewell to the day with a breathtaking show. The soft twilight light cast long shadows over the quiet streets while the faint hum of Ryan's truck engine faded as he turned off the ignition. Ryan Gosling was driving his 1965 Chevrolet C10, a classic vehicle that reflected his understated taste and love for simplicity. As he reached the gate of the condominium, Ryan slowed down and parked his truck next to the security booth. The tall, modern gates were flanked by walls covered in ivy, giving the place an air of exclusivity and sophistication. The condominium seemed like a sanctuary, the kind of place where the outside world couldn't intrude. It was the perfect spot for someone like him, reserved, serene, and far from the chaos of the city. As he stepped out of the truck, adjusting his jacket, Ryan offered a cordial smile to the security guard. The man, standing with a firm posture and impeccable uniform, approached with a watchful, slightly suspicious gaze. It was clear he took his job very seriously. "Good evening. Do you live here? I've never seen you before," the guard said, his tone polite but with a hint of skepticism in his voice. Ryan, still holding his keys, replied in his calm, friendly manner, "Good evening. Yes, I recently moved in. My name is Ryan Gosling." The guard hesitated, furrowing his brow for a moment. He seemed to process what he just heard. Surely he recognized the name. Who wouldn't? But the man in front of him, with his modest truck and understated demeanor, didn't match the image he had of someone like Ryan Gosling. "Ryan Gosling?" the guard repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. "Can you prove it? You don't exactly look like someone who lives here." The question hung in the air, creating an uncomfortable pause. Ryan raised his eyebrows slightly, surprised by the response. He knew being a new resident might require some verification, but he hadn't expected such evident mistrust. "Of course, I have the purchase documents and the lease agreement in my glove compartment. I can show them if necessary," Ryan said, maintaining his characteristic calm, though it was clear the situation was becoming uncomfortable. The guard crossed his arms and cast a quick glance at Ryan's truck. It was a sleek, classic vehicle, but it lacked the ostentatious luxury that many residents here likely preferred. The man seemed to judge not just Ryan but also his choice of transportation. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't let you in without confirmation in the system. And to be honest, no one mentioned that you'd be moving in," the guard said, his tone becoming more defensive, as if bracing himself to justify whatever decision he made. Ryan let out a small sigh, trying to remain patient. He didn't want to make this a bigger issue, but the way he was being treated was starting to attract attention. In the distance, a few condominium staff exchanged curious glances, and a passing resident discreetly observed the scene. "I understand you're just doing your job," Ryan said, keeping his tone calm. "But I assure you, I'm a resident. If needed, I can wait while you confirm with someone." The guard, however, didn't seem willing to budge. He looked at Ryan again, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. The mistrust was evident in every gesture. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" the guard asked, this time with a slight hint of irony. "This condominium isn't exactly for ordinary people." Ryan took a deep breath. He knew losing his temper would only make things worse, so he decided to keep his serene posture. Looking directly into the guard's eyes, he responded with a calmness that was almost disarming. "Don't worry, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The silence that followed was heavy. The guard seemed uncomfortable but unwilling to relent. The twilight continued to fade and the temperature gradually dropped. In the distance, a figure briefly appeared at one of the building's windows, watching the interaction with curiosity. And then came the line that would define the course of the night. "Call whoever you need," Ryan said, his voice steady but firm. "I'll wait right here." The guard narrowed his eyes, surprised by the response. It was clear he wasn't used to someone remaining so calm in such a situation. But what he didn't know was that the night ahead would unfold a series of events that would change his perception, and that of everyone around him. The night was quickly settling in, and the cool evening air began to wrap around the condominium. Ryan stood silently by his truck while the security guard continued to assess him with evident distrust. The atmosphere was tense, but Ryan maintained his signature calm demeanor, even as the situation grew increasingly uncomfortable. "Look, sir, Gosling, right?" the guard said, emphasizing the name as though questioning its authenticity. "I don't mean to be rude, but your name isn't in the system. Without that confirmation, I can't let you in. You understand that, don't you?" Ryan nodded, though the situation was beginning to wear thin. He understood the importance of security protocols, but the guard's tone made it clear that this was more than just following rules. "I understand, but as I said, I'm the new resident of apartment 52. I have the documents to prove it if needed," Ryan replied, his voice steady. The guard let out a heavy sigh, as though the situation was demanding more than he was willing to give. He glanced at Ryan's truck briefly, almost as if silently judging its suitability for someone who might live in such a place. "All right, maybe you've got some documents, but I'd need to confirm with management before letting anyone in. And honestly, this doesn't really seem like the kind of place someone like you would frequent," he said, crossing his arms and giving Ryan a once-over. Ryan, accustomed to being treated cordially by most people, noticed the condescending and prejudiced undertone in the guard's words. He took a deep breath, keeping his patience intact. "I know you're just doing your job, but maybe there's been an issue with the system. If you could contact the administration to confirm, I'm happy to wait," Ryan said, his tone calm but firm. The guard raised his eyebrows and let out a short, almost mocking laugh. "You seem awfully calm for someone trying to get into a place that, let's be honest, doesn't really fit." He paused, clearly thinking twice about his words. "Someone like you." Ryan stayed silent for a moment, carefully observing the man in front of him. He knew that confronting him directly would only escalate things, but he couldn't ignore the way he was being treated. "I trust that you'll do the right thing," Ryan replied in a calm, steady tone. The guard narrowed his eyes as if evaluating Ryan's voice for a hint of defiance. Instead, he found nothing but tranquility, which seemed to irritate him even more. He grabbed the radio clipped to his belt and pressed the button. "Central main gate. We've got a man here claiming to be the new resident of apartment 52. Name, Ryan Gosling. Can you check the system?" His voice was clipped and impatient. Ryan watched as the guard waited for a response. Whatever the reply was, it was inaudible to him, but the guard's expression made it clear that it wasn't what he had hoped for. "Just as I thought," the guard muttered, lowering the radio and turning back to Ryan. "There's no record of anyone with that name. Maybe you should double-check the address before insisting." Ryan gripped his keys firmly, but remained composed. "There's no mistake. This is the correct address. Perhaps the system hasn't been updated yet. It happens." The guard scoffed, shaking his head with a sarcastic chuckle. "Yeah, it happens. But I've worked here for years, and I've never seen anyone arrive unregistered, especially in a place like this. You get what I mean?" Ryan slightly tilted his head, hiding the irritation that was beginning to creep in. "I understand that you have protocols to follow, but I've already given you the apartment number, and I can show you the documents. Isn't that enough?" The guard crossed his arms again, deliberating for a moment. Finally, he stepped back and pointed at Ryan's truck. "Look, all I'm saying is that things here are different. The people who live in this condominium, they don't show up in trucks like that. Maybe you're used to a different kind of place." He shrugged, as if his words were just an innocent observation. Ryan took another deep breath, feeling the weight of the prejudice behind the guard's words. He decided not to respond immediately. Instead, he opened the glove compartment of his truck, pulled out a folder, and extended the documents toward the man. "Here are the apartment documents. Perhaps this will clear things up," Ryan said, his voice calm but firm. The guard reluctantly took the papers, flipping through them quickly, but his expression showed that he wasn't inclined to trust anything he was reading. "These papers might be legit, but I'm not the one who makes the final decision here, and to be honest, I can't just take someone's word for it. It's a matter of security, you know," he said, raising his radio again. I'll call the administrator, but just so you know, it might take a while." Ryan nodded without saying a word. He knew arguing wouldn't help at this point. As the guard made the call, the air around them seemed to grow colder. Ryan glanced at the sky, where a few stars had begun to appear, and wondered how long this situation would drag on. There was a mix of irritation and sadness in his thoughts, not just because of how he was being treated, but because of what it represented. The guard ended the call and looked back at Ryan with a faint expression of impatience. "The administrator is busy at the moment, but I'll wait for a response. Until then, you'll have to stay here. I can't let you in without confirmation." Ryan studied the man's words and actions carefully. He knew this wasn't just about protocols. It was a decision clouded by judgment and bias. "That's fine," Ryan replied simply. "I'll wait." The silence between them grew heavier, amplifying the tension in the air. The guard avoided eye contact, visibly uncomfortable with Ryan's patience, as if expecting him to lose his composure. But Ryan wouldn't. He knew that sooner or later, the truth would come to light. The guard stared at him for a moment and, with an almost provocative tone, said, "Wait as long as you want. I'm not the one who will open the gate for you." What happened next would begin to change the course of the night. The night pressed on, and the situation at the condominium gate seemed far from resolved. The security guard paced back and forth, visibly irritated, casting looks of disdain toward Ryan. The cool light of the gate's lamps reflected off Ryan's truck, highlighting the stark contrast between the modest man standing there and the luxurious environment surrounding him. "Listen here, Mr. Gosling," the guard started, his voice louder and harsher than before. "I've made it clear you're not getting in. I don't know what part of that you don't understand." Ryan remained calm, even in the face of aggression. He took a deep breath before responding. "I'm just waiting for you to do what needs to be done to resolve this." The guard chuckled, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was dry, almost mocking. "Resolve this? What do you think this is? Some cheap motel where anyone can come and go without question? That's not how this works, pal." Ryan tightened his grip slightly on the keys he held, but his composure remained intact. "I never said you should break the rules. I'm asking you to follow protocol and contact the administrator." The guard shook his head, his frustration giving way to open irritation. "Contact the administrator? You think they're going to stop whatever they're doing for someone like you? Honestly, I don't even know why I'm wasting my time here." He stepped closer to Ryan, gesturing exaggeratedly toward the truck. "Look at that. You roll up in an old truck, spinning some story about being a resident, and you expect me to believe you. This place is for people of a certain level, you understand? People with class, with status. You think I'm buying this?" Ryan locked eyes with the guard, his voice remaining steady and composed. "This has nothing to do with status. I have documents proving I live here. All you have to do is verify them." The guard let out a loud sigh, as if Ryan's words were a personal affront. He stepped closer, pointing a finger at him. "Documents? You think some piece of paper is enough to convince me? I've seen all kinds of people try to pull stunts like this. You think you're clever, don't you? But to me, you're just another guy in the wrong place, refusing to admit it." Ryan pressed his lips together but didn't respond immediately. He knew that whatever he said would only feed the guard's behavior. "I'm not leaving," he said finally, his voice firm. "You can take whatever steps you think are necessary, but I'll wait." The guard laughed louder this time, almost hysterically. "Wait? Oh, you think you're in control here? You're not, pal. And I'm done wasting my time. This isn't your kind of place. Look around. Everyone here can see that." Ryan tilted his head slightly, his eyes calmly analyzing the man in front of him. "So, that's it? You think I don't belong here because of my truck? Because of how I look?" The guard interrupted, raising his hand. "Don't give me that. I've been a security guard here for years. I've seen it all, and I can tell who belongs and who doesn't. And you, my friend, definitely don't belong." He stepped back and grabbed the radio at his belt. "All right, that's enough. I'm going to settle this right now." He pressed the button and spoke, his voice heavy with exaggerated authority. "Main gate to Central. I've got an individual refusing to leave, claims to be a resident but isn't in the system and is causing a disturbance, requesting immediate police presence." Ryan watched calmly as the guard spoke into the radio, but there was a flicker of determination in his eyes. He wasn't going to back down, no matter what the guard said or did. The guard clicked off the radio and looked back at Ryan with a smug, almost defiant smile. "Done. Let's see what the police have to say about this waiting of yours." Ryan shrugged, his voice calm but with a hint of steel. "Great, maybe they'll help clear this up." The guard narrowed his eyes, clearly annoyed by Ryan's lack of reaction. "You don't understand the seriousness of this, do you? You're going to regret this, pal. Not everyone gets out of situations like this unscathed." Ryan crossed his arms and tilted his head slightly. "I'm here because I know I've done nothing wrong. The truth will come out." Ryan's calm response only seemed to fuel the guard's frustration. He began pacing back and forth, muttering under his breath. "This is ridiculous. Shows up here like he owns the place. People like this just make my job harder." Time seemed to slow as they both waited for the police to arrive. The tension in the air was palpable, and the guard threw impatient glances at Ryan, as if hoping he would give up and leave. But Ryan stood his ground, unshaken. Finally, the flashing lights of a police car illuminated the gate. The siren was silenced as the vehicle came to a stop, and 2 officers stepped out, their expressions serious as they surveyed the scene. The security guard immediately straightened up, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. To him, this was a confirmation of his authority. Across from him, Ryan stood calmly beside his truck, silent but attentive to every movement. The 2 officers stepped out of the vehicle. The lead officer wore a serious expression, while his partner appeared more relaxed, though both were clearly assessing the situation. The security guard quickly approached them, eager to present his version of events. "Thank goodness you're here," the guard exclaimed, pointing at Ryan. "This man is refusing to leave. He claims to be a resident, but his name isn't in the system and he hasn't shown any legitimate proof. He's causing a disturbance and blocking the gate. I've asked him multiple times to leave, but he won't cooperate." The officers exchanged glances before turning their attention to Ryan. The lead officer raised his hand to signal calm. "Let's get this resolved," he said. "Sir, can you tell us what's going on?" Ryan stepped forward, holding his keys firmly. "My name is Ryan Gosling. I'm the new resident of apartment 52. It seems there's been an issue with the system, and my name hasn't been registered yet. I have documents that prove my ownership. I've been waiting for this to be sorted out." The officer nodded, listening carefully, but the guard interrupted, gesturing impatiently. "He's been saying that since he got here. And look, I've seen this kind of thing before. People making up stories, showing fake papers, trying to sneak in. You know how it is. We can't just take his word for it because he's talking nicely." Ryan cast a steady gaze at the guard but remained silent as the lead officer raised his hand again, cutting the guard off. "Let's take this one step at a time," the officer said. He turned back to Ryan. "Do you have those documents with you now?" "Yes," Ryan replied, opening the glove compartment of his truck. He pulled out a neatly organized folder and handed it to the officers. The lead officer began to review the papers while the guard crossed his arms, rolling his eyes at every page turned. "Seriously," the guard muttered sarcastically. "You're really wasting time on this? Those papers could have come from any printer." The second officer, who had been silent until now, glanced at the guard with a look of clear disapproval. "Let us do our job, all right?" he said firmly. The guard raised his hands in a defensive gesture but couldn't resist another comment. "I'm just saying, it doesn't make sense to waste time on someone who obviously doesn't belong here." Ryan stayed quiet, though a flicker of irritation crossed his face for the first time that evening. He appeared on the verge of responding but restrained himself. Meanwhile, the lead officer finished reviewing the documents and turned to his partner. "Everything here seems legitimate. The contract is signed and registered. I see no reason to doubt this." He then addressed Ryan directly. "Mr. Gosling, thank you for your patience. It looks like there really was an issue with the system. We'll help clarify this." Before Ryan could respond, the guard stepped forward, his face red with frustration. "This is ridiculous. You're going to believe those papers just because they look legitimate? Look at him. Look at his truck. Do you really think someone like him lives here? This place isn't for just anyone, and you know it." Both officers stared at him, surprised by his outburst of hostility. The lead officer spoke with a firm tone, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Sir, this isn't a matter of opinion. What we have here are legitimate documents. He has every right to be here." "Right?" the guard repeated, his voice rising. He shouldn't have even gotten close to the gate. I knew the moment I saw him that he didn't belong here. This makes no sense." Ryan, who had remained calm throughout, stepped forward and spoke in a voice that was firm but measured. "What exactly about me makes you think I don't belong here? My truck? My clothes? Or is it just because I don't fit into your expectations?" The guard faltered for a moment, caught off guard but quickly regained his defensive posture. "This isn't personal. I'm just doing my job, making sure the condominium stays secure. People like you show up here from time to time trying to be something they're not." "People like me?" Ryan repeated, his words sharp but his tone unwavering. "I think that says more about you than it does about me." The officers exchanged looks, their expressions shifting to subtle disapproval. The guard seemed ready to retort again, but the lead officer raised his hand, cutting him off. "That's enough," he said, his voice firm and commanding. The security guard was the first to respond, speaking with the same arrogance he had displayed all evening. "Sir, I've got this under control. This man," he pointed at Ryan, "claims he's a new resident, but his name isn't in the system. I've told him multiple times to leave, but he refuses. He brought some papers, but honestly, they're unconvincing." The administrator glanced at the guard with a look of irritation before turning to Ryan. As soon as his eyes landed on Ryan's face, his entire demeanor changed. His expression softened, surprise mixed with embarrassment replacing his earlier sternness. "My God, Mr. Gosling," he exclaimed, clearly recognizing the actor immediately. "I am so sorry for all of this. This is a huge misunderstanding." The silence that followed was almost palpable. The officers paused their review of the documents to look at the administrator, while the security guard blinked repeatedly, as if struggling to process what had just happened. "You know him?" the older officer asked. "Of course I do," the administrator replied, still visibly uncomfortable. "This is Ryan Gosling, the new resident of apartment 52. We were fully aware of his move-in, but unfortunately, there was a delay updating the system. That's entirely on us." He turned back to Ryan, bowing his head slightly in apology. "Mr. Gosling, please accept my deepest apologies. This treatment is absolutely unacceptable." Ryan remained calm, but his words carried weight when he finally spoke. "I understand mistakes happen, but the problem here wasn't just the system. The problem was how I was treated this entire time." The administrator's face fell, clearly mortified. He shot a sharp look at the security guard, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Is that true?" the administrator asked, his tone icy and authoritative. The guard stammered, his voice faltering. "Sir, I was just following protocols. He wasn't in the system, and I—" "Following protocols?" the administrator interrupted, his voice rising. "What you did wasn't following protocols. That was blatant disrespect. Mr. Gosling is one of our most esteemed residents, and you treated him like an intruder." I, the guard stuttered, but the administrator wasn't interested in hearing excuses. "I don't want apologies right now. We'll address this later." Turning back to Ryan, the administrator's expression softened once more. "Mr. Gosling, please let me know what we can do to make this right. I don't want you to leave with this impression of the condominium." Ryan studied the administrator for a moment before replying, his voice calm but resolute. "What happened here tonight shouldn't happen to anyone, famous or not. You need to ensure that this doesn't happen to anyone else who comes through these gates. Judging someone based on appearance or preconceived notions is unacceptable." The administrator nodded, his embarrassment evident. "You're absolutely right, and I assure you this will be addressed immediately. We'll review our security procedures to make sure something like this never happens again." Turning to the officers, the administrator offered a polite nod. "Thank you for coming. We won't need anything further. You can consider this resolved." The officers exchanged glances, nodded, and returned the documents to Ryan. "Everything seems to be in order. Have a good evening, Mr. Gosling," the older officer said. Ryan nodded slightly in acknowledgement, but then turned his gaze to the security guard. Taking a small step forward, he looked him directly in the eye. "I hope you learned something from this. It's not about protocols. It's about how you treat people." The guard opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked away, clearly defeated. The administrator signaled for the gate to be opened. "Please, Mr. Gosling, let me escort you to your apartment to ensure everything is in order." Ryan shook his head. "That's not necessary. I just want to go in and rest." The gate began to open slowly, and Ryan restarted his truck. He drove in at a measured pace, but not before casting one last glance at the security guard. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet, weighted silence. As Ryan disappeared into the well-lit streets of the condominium, the administrator turned to the guard, his face stern. "We're going to talk about this now," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The guard nodded, his earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by a subdued, embarrassed silence.